Romans 13, guys, kind of plowing through this. I feel like you guys are slowly moving farther back as the weeks go on here. Now, what's going on here, Dave? Nothing. No one's sitting around you. You're trying to idle.
I like spit distance.
Yeah, that's good. So, as we're moving now towards the end of Romans, you might remember from the very beginning we talked about how Paul really is focusing on this idea of identity. That you had in Rome Jewish believers and Gentile believers. The Jews were expulsed from Rome, and then as they're coming back, you had this tension between the two groups about who controls the churches, who is going to be in primary leadership. And so Paul's writing to these believers, trying to teach them, how do you become one, right? And what he does is in 1-8, he makes the case that everybody stands on equal ground before God, right? Because all of us are what, Britt?
What?
We're all what? I know I saw that look in your eyes. We're all sinners before God, sinners. Right? Yeah. We are all on equal ground. Jew, Gentile, it doesn't matter what it is. And so he talks about how by faith alone, that is what draws all of us back to God. 9, 10, and 11, he goes into, has God forgotten his people, Israel? May it never be. That God has grafted the Gentiles into the original branch, that God has not forgotten his people, they are his covenant people. And we talk about what God's plan is for Israel someday in the future. Then he gets to 12 and he says, hey, if all of this is true, then verses 1 and 2, by the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. And he now begins to talk about how do you live the Christian life. If 1-8 is true, and if God is a God of promises, and he fulfills his promises, and 9-11 is true, what does that mean for all of us? How do you live the Christian life? And so 12 to the end of the book is kind of what we call the practical section of the book of Romans. In other words, you can't have 12-16 if you don't have 1-11. 1-11 sets up the reason for why we want to pursue the Christian life the way that we do. And so as you get to the end of chapter 12, I want to revisit a few verses here because it sets up chapter 13. Look what he says in verse 17. He says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Give careful thought to do what is honorable in everyone's eyes. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for God's wrath. And so you have, at the very end of 12, Paul is exhorting them, don't take matters into your own hands. Love people as much as you can. Live for peace as much as you can. Vengeance is God's, it's not yours. And now he's going to get into chapter 13, and he's going to talk about this idea of submitting yourself to all governing authorities. And in the context, Paul is somebody who has been abused by the Roman authorities. Even though he's Roman also, he has Roman lineage, and he has privileges that come from being a Roman citizen. Paul has been in prison. Paul will die by the hands of Rome. And yet Paul is going to be talking to a lot of people, a lot of believers who are suffering at the hands of the Roman government. And he's going to say, submit yourselves to their authority. So Paul is not speaking theoretically. Paul is speaking very, very practically. And if you remember, there's a little principle I use whenever you're studying the Bible. And it's you always want to ask yourself 3 questions when you're reading the Bible. What did it mean back then? What does it always mean? And then what does it mean for me today? Right? So the first part is just the historical work. You go back, you look at the historical background. What did Paul mean back then at this time? But the real important question after that is, what does this always mean? And it's out of that question that you apply your Bible. You don't apply your Bible from the first question. You apply your Bible today from the second question. Because it's the universal principles that matter. So when you look at a verse like this, let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God. What is the universal principle that you think we could extract from that verse? If the backdrop is, this is an oppressive authority, Rome has come in and caused great hardship to the church. They view Christianity as a superstition. And yet Paul now is saying, submit to this authority. What's the principle? What do you think would be a principle you could pull from that that's always true? It's true 2,000 years ago. It's true 100 years ago. It'll be true 100 years from now. It doesn't matter where you are. What's the universal principle?
I think you said it in live in peace.
Okay, one, because we're called to peace.
Called peace.
Right, so I submit to governing authorities because I'm called to live in peace. Peace is what should reign in my heart. I think that's good, Barrett. That's number one. What else? What's another universal?
Sovereignty of God.
Okay, what about it?
He controls who's in power, how long they're in power, what they do when they're in power.
Dwayne, was that true 1,000 years ago?
Absolutely.
Will that be true 100 years from now?
Yes.
Yeah, unless he returns, God is the one who's in control. God is the one who puts all people in power. So that's universally true. My submission is ultimately to God, which may show up in submission to governing authorities in this world. But that's a universal principle. God is always the one that's ultimately in control. Give me one more. What's another universal principle? It's always true from this. What do you think? It's the part where we dialogue together. What else is always true?
Those authorities come and go.
What's that?
Those authorities come and go.
Okay, authorities come and go, but what doesn't? The one who put them in authority, right? God is one who remains. These authorities come and go. The one thing that doesn't go is going to be, that doesn't come and go is going to be your relationship to God. I think one of the principles that I see through this, submit yourself to governing authorities, is this. That will there always be people and institutions in life that can feel oppressive and cause harm and that we can become victims of? What do you think? Is it just government? Can your next door neighbor do this? You guys ever live next to him? That person, that boss that's unfair, that event in life that happens. You guys ever had an unfair event in life happen to you? Just out of curiosity. Anybody ever have something happen to you that you felt like was unjust? And you had to manage it? And what Paul is saying is there's a principle here. We live in an unjust world. Is that universal? This side of heaven? It's unjust. People are broken. People are sinners. People cause harm. Hurt people hurt people. And whether it's in government, whether it's in marriage, whether it's at work, whether it's in the community, it doesn't matter. We're all going to face people and institutions and groups that cause great harm and great damage to people. That's the idea. And if that is the case, I'm commanded to do one thing above all. And the principle that Paul talks about throughout the book of Romans is that love, that is the principal power that's going to allow me to do what he calls me to do here. It's love. Love for who?
One another.
Love for one another. Which has to be rooted first where?
Love you, Lord.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. To the degree that I can love the Lord is the degree that I can look at my neighbor and love my neighbor. So now when I get to 13:1 and I see let everyone submit themselves to the governing authorities, okay, this idea is that it's ultimately going to be rooted in my love for God. This isn't just white-knuckling obedience. Is it difficult as a believer sometimes to live in a world and in a culture where it seems like everything is going against everything that you value and believe in? Can that be difficult? Can you have Christian movements rise up to try to take political power in society? Can that happen? Yeah, and it has. I mean, most of us in this room remember the moral majority, right? They were reacting against the sexual revolution of the 60s and the 70s. America really changing shape in so many ways, and the moral majority wanted morality back in every aspect of government, every aspect of schools, every aspect of society. You had later the Tea Party. Remember the Tea Party? They got sick of overreach of government. They got sick of the burdens of excessive taxation. You had the Tea Party come up. It was a reaction, predominantly a lot of believers in that movement. You've got the MAGA movement of today. What is it that the MAGA movement stands for today? As a movement.
America great.
Making America great again. And how do they see America being great again? By doing what? Throwing off the constraints of government, right? Throwing off the burdensome rules and regulations and burdens of government, and promoting liberty and freedom. That's the idea. Now, can you do all those things in such a way that you create division and animosity in society? Can that happen? I heard that can happen.
Every day.
And when you do that, the approach that you use is everything. The approach is what matters more to God than anything else, right? You can believe fervently in all three of those movements, but your approach and how you go into society and how you choose to live peaceably with society is going to make the difference with how society views you and the gospel and your Christ, right? And this is what Paul cares about. Paul cares about the reputation of believers. This is what matters to him. It matters how I interact with people about current events. It matters how I talk about society. It matters how I talk about government and politics. It really does. And if I go in with a divisive mentality, right? This is what Paul did not want to happen. There was a party in Judaism called the Zealots. You guys remember the Zealots? There was a famous disciple that followed Jesus, an apostle. Remember who he was? Simon the Zealot. The Zealot party was a radical party. And there was a branch of the Zealot party called the Sicarii. And Sicarii comes from a Greek word that means little sword. And the Sicarii party would go out into the city. And anybody that they knew that was a Jew, that wasn't as committed as they were to social reform and overthrowing Rome, they had these little Sicarii swords. And they would be in these crowds and they would stab people. And they would kill them, and they would then blend off into the crowd. They would go assassinate Roman and Jewish leaders in the middle of the night. It was the Sicarii party. And these were the Zealots. They were committed to overthrowing Rome. And they were part of the reason why the Jews had such a bad reputation for being rebellious people. Like Rome hated the rebellion of the Jews. Now here comes this movement called Christianity, that is an offshoot of Judaism. And what do you think that Paul is fighting hard against when it comes to the reputation of the church? What does he not want the church to be in Rome? What do you think? He doesn't want us to be he doesn't want them to be a rebellious party that doesn't care about civil rule and civil law. He doesn't want them to be a people that the world looks at and sees them as an unruly group of people. So Paul's going to make this argument. Look what he says now. He says, now let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there's no authority except from God. So there's the initial statement. Submit. And then same word by the way that is used for men and women submit to one another. And then women, submit yourselves to your husbands. It's this idea of placing oneself under, right? That there's an authority that we have with each other. Not just men and women over women, but even husbands and wives, submit yourselves to one another. There's a mutual willing humbleness to submit yourself to another person. What does it take to submit yourself to governing authorities? What virtue does it take to submit yourself to governing authorities? Humility. To be wronged. To be wronged, and yet to not extract revenge or to fight for what's yours. And he says, submit yourself to these authorities. And the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command. In other words, to the degree that I push back and I resist authority, now he's not talking about you have to do everything the government says. What is the one exception the Bible gives you about disobeying the government?
If they want you to do something contrary to what God wants you to do.
That's the only exception, Spunky. The only exception is I have to submit myself to their rulership unless what they ask me to do is in direct violation to God's word. Right? That's it. Everything else, I may not like it. And you're going to see here in just a minute, he's going to tell them to do some things that are very unfair. They are very unfair. Paul is not in the business of making things fair. He's in the business of honoring God. And honoring God as part of our civic duty. So he goes on and he says, you oppose God's command, and those who oppose it will bring stricter judgment on themselves. Well, how's that happen? Well, you're going to accept judgment either from God or from the civil authorities. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct. Why are rulers not a terror to good conduct? What's his argument?
If you haven't done anything wrong, they're not going to bother you.
That's it. Now, it's kind of funny. I mean, Paul didn't do anything wrong. Really. Did he suffer? Yeah, that's called an injustice. Now, in the eyes of Rome, he did, because what did Rome think Paul was preaching?
Like a takeover rebellion.
What's that?
Rebellion.
They thought Paul was preaching atheism. That Paul was preaching that you were not to declare Caesar as Lord. That to say that Jesus is Lord and to reject all other gods was to preach atheism. And so he was killed because of this rebellion against the state. Even though Paul was not rebelling against the state, he was preaching the true God. Rome saw him as rebelling against the state, and they killed him for that. It's the same reason, by the way, Socrates got killed. Socrates got killed because they said Socrates was turning the young men of the city to atheists because he was turning them against the pagan gods, the Greek gods of his day. And they killed him. Same thing with Paul. Paul gets killed for that same reason. So even though it's an injustice, Paul still says he's going to submit to it. And then he says, do you want to be unafraid of the one in authority? Then do what is good, and you will have its approval. You know, you never really have to worry about cops if what? Scott, you never have to worry. I don't know why I said you, but you never have to worry about cops if what?
You don't do anything bad.
You don't do anything bad. You know, when you're driving, you don't have to look a quarter mile down the road for cops, Mac, if you're not doing what? If you're not speeding. Okay? If we're obeying the law, I don't have to drive worried looking all around me for cops because I'm obeying the law. Now, can there be irritable cops? Can there be cops out there looking for stuff? Sure, but that's not what Paul's talking about. He's talking about as a general principle. If you obey the law and obey the rules, you've got nothing to worry about. So when you can let love and peace rule your hearts and lead the way you treat people and treat authorities, you've got nothing to worry about. And then he says, you'll have its approval. Verse 4, for government is God's servant. It's the word deacon. Paul is calling government, ruling authorities, God's deacon. It's the same word you use for a deacon that serves in the church. He says, it is God's servant for your good. How is government a servant for your good? Russell, give me one example of how government today is a servant for good. What does it do?
Cleans water.
There you go. Are we happy about that, by the way? Do we want some regulatory affairs in this war in our country? Yes? Anybody want to go to the grocery store and have no regulations? Just let them put whatever slab of meat out they want, however long it's been there? No, it's there for your good. It's there to protect you. It's to keep you from vomiting at 2 in the morning, right? Because they've got very specific parameters on how long that meat can stay out, right? It's there for your good. What else does government do that's good? I feel like I'm preaching to the wrong crowd here right now. But
Fire department.
what's that?
Fire department.
Fire department. Man, I'm so grateful for the fire department, police department. What else are you grateful for? Come on. Let's be pro-government for just a minute here. What'd you say?
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. How many of you are glad that almost all the roads are good in Denton? Infrastructure, right? Buildings, sewage systems, water systems, tanks, aren't you glad that we have government that is an ordered system that seeks to take care of those things to provide? Now, what's it going to take to pay for those things?
Taxes.
Okay, we're going to get to that here in just a second. Or Paul is. But man, that's a lot of... What else does the government do? You're missing the biggest one.
Protect our borders.
There you go.
Punish evil men.
Protect our country. Right? They set up institutions called a military and law enforcement to protect us from harm. They enforce laws. So there's a lot of good that government does. Now, not all governments are the same, but all governments approximate some level of good for their people. Because if they didn't, eventually all governments get thrown over, right? So he's saying government, by its nature, the nature of government is good. There's nothing wrong with government. It's going to be the people that lead government, oftentimes, that can be where the problem lies, not in government itself. So then he says, it's God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, look at this. What's it say? Be afraid. You don't see that phrase very often. One of the most common phrases, 365 times in your Bible, is do not fear. Here, Paul says, be afraid. When should you be afraid? When you're doing something wrong.
Breaking the law.
Breaking the law. Breaking the law. That's right. That'll make a song called that, Jed.
How does this jive with, say, the American Revolution?
That's a great question. I knew someone was going to ask that today. So think about that. The American Revolution, it was fleeing from what?
Tyranny.
From tyranny. But specifically, when they got here and they realized that we have built a pretty good system here, what was it that we finally declared independence from? What was the grievance?
Taxes.
Excessive taxation without representation, right? This is one of the reasons that a lot of people would argue that if Paul looked at the overthrow of England and to break away from England because of excessive taxation, Paul would say that is an unbiblical reason to break free. That's an unbiblical reason. And that's a whole other conversation. It's not the only reason they did that. I mean, if you go back and look at the Declaration of Independence, you'll see an entire list of what? Of grievances. It wasn't just one grievance. There was an entire list of the tyranny of the king, of the abuses of the king, right? And so they made a choice to finally rebel and to create their own independence. Whole other conversation. I think it's a good one to have. But let's not overly romanticize the American Revolution. It was what it was. We are who we are today. Okay? But I'm not so sure that the impetus of that was necessarily in line with what Paul's talking about here. But we can argue that another time. Verse 5. Therefore, you must submit, there it is again, not only because of wrath, the wrath of who? God and the state, both, but also because of your conscience. Right? And for this reason, you pay, what? You pay taxes. That's why we got to hire people to do it for us. Right? Because sometimes it can get really confusing. It can get very complicated. And you pay taxes, since the authorities are God's servants. Right? Did you know that? The IRS is God's servant, continually attending to these tasks. Pay your obligations to everyone. And there's two kinds of payments he's going to talk about here. Taxes to those you owe. Now, there was what's known as a tributary tax. This was a tax that was paid once a year, and it was simply for living under the system of Rome. That was it. If you were a Roman citizen, you didn't pay this tax. If you were a non-Roman citizen and you lived in the Roman territory, you paid this tax. Because guess what that tax went to? All the services. What did you say?
Schools and roads.
All the elementary schools of Rome. Yeah, it went to the infrastructure of Rome. It went because you were living under the protection of Rome. If you had evildoers coming in to invade Rome, they would fight for your protection. So you paid this tributary tax. And sometimes this tax was very burdensome. It was a heavy tax. Depending on who the Caesar was, they could set that tax arbitrarily at anything that they wanted. Right? And this is one of the reasons why the Jews were so rebellious. The Jewish people fought back against Rome and against that tributary tax. They thought it was unfair and unjust because in fact, the Zealot party, they thought paying a tax to anybody was an act of betrayal to God. Because God is the only one who should be able to exact money from people. That no government, especially a pagan government, should be able to exact that kind of money. So they created their own justification for the overthrow of the Roman government. So that's one type. He says, pay these taxes. But then he says this, taxes to those you owe taxes, and tolls to those you owe tolls. And that word tolls there is this idea of revenues. It was all the money that would be charged for daily business. It would be tariffs. It would be the cost of doing business, of going through certain roads. That they actually had little toll booths. Did you know that? Right? We didn't just come up with that on the Dallas Tollway. This has been going on for a couple thousand years or longer. That any way they could make a few extra, drachma, right? They're going to do it. And they're going to get that money from the people. And you had what were called farmers, tax farmers. And these tax farmers were hired by the state to go out, and guess what their job was to do? Very much like the Jewish tax collector, what would they do? They would go and collect the taxes, but guess what they would do? They'd pad it. Because the state allowed them to kind of build in a little extra for themselves, and that was completely up to them. However much they wanted to add. So they would go into a community, they would evaluate the community, and they would then excise an extra tax on you depending on how much they thought you should be able to pay. Right? Is that fair, by the way? No. And so you've had, and you have these movements even today, these kind of anti-tax movements. You've had people go to prison because they think that, it's against the Constitution to pay income tax. And these people go to jail. They go to prison, right? They're refusing to pay the taxes that are owed. And what Paul is saying is, it's not about is it fair. What's the question? It's not is it fair. What's the question we should be asking? What does God say about it? What does God want me to do? What does it mean to be a good citizen? What does it mean to be a person who practices my civic duty? Right? And this matters on all levels. It doesn't matter if it's the dog catcher, to the governor, to the president. If there is a person in authority, I have to listen to them. Right? When I'm traveling and I see an unreasonable ticket agent or flight attendant or whatever, and I think it's unreasonable, they are all supported by federal law. Right? The moment I get on that plane, whose plane is that? Essentially.
Government.
It's controlled by government law. Right? And I could go to jail. I have to submit myself to whatever that authority is. When I see certain flight attendants that are just rude or disrespectful, and I want to cop an attitude, okay? Paul says no. As much as is possible with you, have peace with them. Right? Let love rule in your hearts. Submit yourselves to their authority. Doesn't matter how unfair it is. I think I told you guys, maybe last time, one of the most absurd examples of this was when I walked into Terminal D, I think, in Dallas. And there was nobody there. Literally nobody. And they forgot to take the snake rope down. And I walk up, and the TSA agent's right there. I got to go through security, and I go under the rope. Just got my suitcase. And she's right there. I just go under the rope right there, and she goes, "Sir, you have to follow the path." And I look, and I'm not exaggerating. There wasn't a single person. And I said, "Yeah, but there's no one there." She goes, "You can't go under the rope. It's against the rules." And I went, "Okay." And I went back under the rope, and I began walking down this snake. It's like a Seinfeld episode.
You stare at her the whole time.
I kept thinking, how awkward is this going to be when I finally get to her again? And it literally was it had to have been 6 or 7 loops. Just all, if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. It's ridiculous, right? And she's just sitting there, right, on her TikTok. And I finally, I walk right up to her, and I hand her my license, right? And she looks at it, and I put my boarding pass on the thing. She goes, "Thank you, have a nice day." Yeah! Man, it killed me. I even turned around and took a picture of the whole thing, right? And posted it on LinkedIn.
Did you tell her she's going to be a sermon illustration now?
I should have got her name. But, look, I could have argued with her, right? How would that have gone, by the way?
You would have made your flight.
Yeah. It was last week. I'm watching on YouTube this guy, a passenger is filming it. This guy had a little portable pillow, and they asked him on takeoff to please, take that off until they're up in the air. And he wouldn't do it. And the flight attendant came by 2 or 3 times and asked him multiple times and said again, "Sir, if you don't do that, I'm going to have to remove you from the plane." He didn't take it seriously. And so finally they're getting ready, and she sees him, and she goes, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to get off this flight." "What?" And this guy's videoing the whole thing. And he's like, "I'm not getting off this flight. I got to get to New Orleans. I got business in New Orleans. Look, okay, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it. I'm going to sit here quietly for the rest of the flight. I'm not going to say a word. I promise." "Sir, I need you to get off the plane right now." "I am not getting off this plane." Where do you think this thing is going? He's getting off the plane. And it was just a riot, man, watching this guy acting like he's not getting off that plane. And all of a sudden, the captain comes out, and he says, "Sir, you need to get off this plane. This is my plane. You need to get off this plane, or we'll bring security." He says, I'm not getting off. I've got to get..." Sure enough, guess what boards the plane? Ronnie, who boarded the plane? The police boarded that plane. They get on there, both of them. They get this guy. You're not going to win. He's saying basically, listen, live within the civil authority. Live at peace. It doesn't matter how unfair or how unjust you think it is. Submit to authority is what he's talking about. Why is this so hard, by the way? This is not an easy teaching. Why is this so hard?
Self-will.
Pride. I think let's start off right there. Pride. What else? What did you say, Travis?
I didn't say anything.
You didn't? Sure sounded
I want
like
to
you.
take the credit.
Self-will.
Oh, self-will, yeah. It's just, I'm an autonomous creature, right? No one tells me what to do. That's what it is. See, Paul's argument in Romans is you are no longer your own, right? It's no longer this autonomous being that goes around and lives this autonomous life. That I am now Christ's, right? It is Christ in me, is what it is. So he says, pay your obligations to everyone. Taxes, tolls, revenues, respect, and he says, respect to those you owe respect, and honor to those you owe honor. By the way, that phrase, honor to those you owe honor, who do you think he's talking about? Who deserves honor? Huh? All those in authority. The role, the position itself, right? You see this in Peter. You see this in Thessalonians. You see this idea that it's the position that God has established. That God is an orderly God. God sets up creation with order, society in order, marriage in order. Everything has an order to it. And so I don't necessarily have to respect you as a person, but I have to respect your authority. I have to respect your position, right? And I've got to respect that. So then he goes down to verse 8. Look what he says. Do not owe anyone anything except to love one another. It's almost like it's a summary thought. Why do you think he follows up with love after he just got through talking about submitting yourself to the governing authorities? Why does he follow with love?
Because it'd be easy to be ticked off.
Spunky, the only way you can do this is to allow love to fill your heart. You know, I know for me, my hardest times of submitting is when love is least present in my heart. In fact, if anything, it's anger, resentment, whatever those things are. But when love fills the heart, you now are able to look at someone who treats you unjustly, right? Yesterday I got a call from a good friend of mine who lives in another state, and he and his wife just hit the wall, right? They're in a bad spot. She's done some things that are pretty painful. He's done some things that are pretty painful. He's called me, he's talking to me, and for the first, 20 minutes, all he's talking about is what? What do you think? All he's talking about is what? Her. It's all he can talk about. And he's going back. He is getting historical, and how she's always been, and how this has always been like this, and that's all he can talk about. And I knew he needed a vent, so he's just kind of going on and on. And we got to the place where I started talking to him, and he said, "Hey, I know you've been through some hard things in your life. How did you get through them?" And I told him the only way you can get through it is somehow you have to tap into that place in your heart to say, ultimately, this person may be difficult to love, but I'm called to love them. I have to love them. And I have to make peace in my heart with them. No matter what happens, I have to fight for peace in my heart. Right? Because to not do that leads to nothing but what? Resentment and contempt. You ever meet somebody who lives with contempt? There is a deep, deep resentment they have, and they've never let it go, and they've always held it against somebody. Right? Contempt is a corrosion of the soul, is what it is. And Paul has given us a prescription for living. And the way you allow your heart and your soul to have life is you have to let love and peace rule in your hearts. It's the only way. It cannot be to fight for justice. Don't owe anyone anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and any other commandment are summed up by this commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, if you love your neighbor as yourself, what will you not do? All the thou shalt nots. Because if I love you, Spunky, I'm not going to covet. I'm not going to steal. I'm not going to cause harm against you. Because love is the thing that's going to keep me from doing all those things that cause harm. So love rules in our heart. And then he says, verse 10, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Does it? Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. How do I deal with those difficult situations that I think are so unfair? I have to do everything I can to get my heart to a place of love. And I got to start with how God loved me. How has God loved me? Remember that great parable? The two debtors that owe all this money. One owed a debt he could never pay. One owed a debt he could pay. What did the master do to the one who had a debt he couldn't pay? Forgave it all. Guy couldn't believe it. He goes into town, Spunky. He sees the guy that owes him a debt that he could pay. What does he do? He throws him in jail because he couldn't pay it right then. The irony in the story, if you go back and read it, both of them said the same thing. The guy that had the debt that he could not pay says to his master, "Have mercy on me, for I will pay you everything." And he couldn't. The guy that could pay the debt, he looks at this guy, and guess what he says to him? "Have mercy on me, for I will pay you everything." And he has no mercy on him. Right? And the master looks at that, and he says, "You evil servant, for I have forgiven you that which you could not pay, and you have held this against him." Right? You evil servant. The idea is we start with how much God has loved us. Getting in touch with the fact that He is embraced and accepted us as we are because we're his children and he loves us. I start from there and then I work out of that. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Then what? Love your neighbor as yourself. I can only love my neighbor as myself to the degree that my heart has been cultivated to love God. Because, man, I've got my limits. Verse 11. Besides this, since you know the time, it is already the hour for you to wake up from sleep. Because now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. Paul is talking about Christ's return. Okay? Paul believed in the imminent return of Jesus. The night is nearly over. The day is near. Let us discard the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk with decency in the day, as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual impurity and promiscuity, not in quarreling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. You see what Paul's saying? Because the day is coming. Night is almost over. Let's live with perspective. How do I deal with the injustices of this world? Number one, I look at how much God has loved me. Number two, I need to stop and have some perspective. In light of eternity, how much do the injustices of this world that I experience, what do they weigh in light of eternity?
Nothing.
Nothing. Paul considers the injustices of this world negligible compared to the glories of the things to come. See, that is a kingdom-minded perspective. In the long run, what does this matter? What matters is my heart. What matters is that I don't go to contempt and resentment and anger and bitterness and corrupt my heart and corrupt the soul that I have. So so this is what Paul says, put on Christ. When you put on Christ, you're able now to just let things go. Now, all that said, let me address one last thing. Is there a place? Does God call us to just be punching bags?
No.
Absolutely not. God does not call us to, I think one of the worst, most abused verses that people use is in Galatians, where it says, for I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And people just say, oh, I don't even exist. It's not about me. Do whatever you want to me. That is not what he's saying at all. He's saying that you have a new identity. There's an old narcissistic self that has been crucified and it has died. Let it die. And there's a new nature. It is Christ in you. And you're to live according to that new nature. That is not saying, do not stand up for yourself. Do not fight for the good. God calls us to fight for the public good. If I can fight within the domain of law, and I can do it in a way that's respectful, and I can maintain as best I can peace along the way, I'm going to fight for an ordered society because it promotes the good. As a Christian, my responsibility is to promote the public good. So I'm going to vote for people that I believe are going to do that. I'm going to be a participant in the civic sphere. I'm going to live in society in such a way that I promote love and harmony and peace with people. I'm going to talk about the truth in a way that doesn't cause unnecessary division. Okay? We have a responsibility as believers to promote the public good. If I see wrong, I'm going to address wrong, and I'm going to try to do it in a way that's in a spirit of love and gentleness, but with truth. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to let my flesh, the carnality of my life, I'm not going to allow that to come in and cause a division that's going to cause harm to the name of Christ and to the church, right? That I have a duty as a Christian towards good public civic service. That's it. So the reason I love Romans 13 is because Paul is living this. He has suffered the abuse, and because he suffered it, he has all the credibility and all the authority to say, submit yourself. Lay aside that carnality and that pride. Submit to the authority. God put them in authority. And when you do that, right? God will be glorified and God will be honored because he put them in place, right? That's it. Romans 13. Now, we're going to get to Romans 14, and we're going to talk about a very interesting question, and it's going to be about liberty, about freedom. How much freedom do we have as believers? And when do I limit my freedom, right? So that's going to be, I think, a really great, challenging chapter for all of us as we think about how do I take the freedoms that God has called me to and not abuse them or hold them over other people of weaker faith, right? Romans 14.